Hello, Howie. This is Dr. Nyambura. Hello, Howie. Hello, Howie. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Nyambura Mboro. I am delighted to be back. If you could just send me a message to tell me you can hear me okay and that the picture's good, that would be great. How's the picture? And how's the sound? I can't see any comments. Let me have a look here simultaneously. Okay, I can see the comments on my phone, and I think I'll keep having a look as they come up. Hi, Kahaki. Hi, Faith. Hi, Pat. Okay, I can see the comments on my phone, and I think I'll keep having a look as they come up. Let's just turn the volume down on that. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. The sound is audible. Thanks, Pat. Excellent. Let's get started. We have about 10 people. As usual, people keep joining in as we go on. Thanks, Ricard. Great. So my name is Dr. Nyambura Mboro Svensson. I am an obesity physician, and it's such a pleasure to be hosted again by Howie to talk about what I love, which is obesity and metabolic health. That is my chosen line of work. That's what I do as a medical doctor. And I just wanted to thank Faith in particular for inviting me to this forum. So this is my third or fourth video, and today we're going to be talking about ketogenic diets. And this is brought on by the majority of my clients and the majority of people who know what I do. I am asked this question probably 3 or 4 times a week. So let's explore it. Let's talk about it. If you've not seen my previous videos, you can find them on Howie or on my wall on Facebook. You can also find them on my YouTube page. I've talked about obesity in the context of sickness. I've talked about the importance of fat and how you shouldn't fear fat. And I've also done video on sugar and the dangers of excessive sugar. Okay. Hi, Uganga. Hi, Irene, Tibet, Trish. Fantastic. I think everyone seems to be here. So why don't we get started? So we're going to be talking about ketogenic diets today, and I want to let you know that I have no affiliations to any ketogenic companies or any company selling any products. This is just information that I know. And as a scientist, I spend a lot of time doing my research and making sure that the information I provide to you is truthful to the best of my ability. And that's what I'm going to present today. It's important that you know that as physicians, we receive very, very little nutrition education. I think in medical school, I might have had an hour or two in the entirety of my medical school being taught about the impact of nutrition. And what is true is that we've been trained to believe that actually diets and food have very little impact and they're not really a powerful intervention. But what I want to submit to you is actually that is not true. they have a huge impact. And let's start talking about that today. So what is a ketogenic diet? Everyone asks me. Now, a ketogenic diet is a low carbohydrate diet. So that's the first thing. It's a low carbohydrate diet, but low carb is a very general term. A ketogenic diet is different from a standard American diet or a standard westernized diet, based mainly on the ratios of the macronutrients. So what are macronutrients? Macronutrients are the foods that we eat, and they are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Those are your three macronutrients. To start with, a standard westernized diet, if you look at the WHO guidelines, we are asked to consume 50 to 75% of carbohydrates, 15% of protein, and 35% of fats. That is, and within those fats, 30 to 35%, we're not supposed to be consuming any more than 10% of saturated fat. So that is a classic dietary guideline in most countries. So just remember that 50 to 75% of carbohydrates. The ketogenic diet consists of 5 to 10% of total carbohydrates only. And then it consists of 20 to 25% protein, so it's higher, and 70 to 80% fat. So in general, the ketogenic diet is a high fat, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate diet. Now, how low? We'll talk about that later. Some people say in terms of actual values, less than 10 grams, less than 20 grams, less than 30 grams. Towards the end of this video, I will advise you on what I think is a safe level of carbohydrate. The reason I really wanted to talk about the ketogenic diet is this is one of the few diets that actually acknowledges that the calorie theory is complete and utter nonsense. And I've talked about this before. We are not machines. And even though the calorie theory has taken hold, we really are not a thermodynamically closed unit. We are human beings, and therefore we cannot account for every single gram of expended energy. We're not a closed unit. So there's no calories in equals calories out. It doesn't work like that. The calories are really important only because different calories can have very different metabolic effects on the body. And the calories that we're going to be talking about today is the carbohydrates and how they affect the protein hormone called insulin. Now, remember that insulin is a very small hormone. It's a protein-based hormone that's produced by the pancreas, which is a very small gland near your back. And the insulin is produced in response to the amount of carbohydrate or sugar in your blood. So if you eat a high sugar diet or a high carbohydrate diet, your blood sugar rises, and subsequently your insulin level rises. And insulin is a very, very powerful hormone. Its job is to clear glucose out of your blood. Why? Because very, very high glucose can be dangerous because they can cause profound dehydration and an almost comatose state. And very, very low blood sugars are also dangerous, and that can cause seizures and ultimately death. And insulin, the hormone insulin, is responsible for tightly regulating the sugar balance. And if that sugar balance goes off, we become very, very sick either way. So insulin says, right, I've seen all this glucose and now I'm going to get it all and shunt it and escort it into the cells. Which cells are we talking about? Well, the biggest reservoir for glucose in the body is your fat cells and your muscle cells. These are the cells that comprise the vast majority of your body, and that's where insulin shunts the glucose to get rid of it in the blood and to dump it there into your fat cells and your muscle cells. And it does that efficiently in a healthy state. You probably may not know this, but insulin is not required to introduce glucose in all cells. It's only required it's required for many cells, but not all cells. And in particular, It is not important in the liver and in the brain. And what that means is that the liver cells and the brain cells can get glucose from the blood independently of insulin. And this is important based on what we're going to talk about next. So the premise of the low carbohydrate diet is that carbohydrates are the one macronutrient that increase the level of blood sugars in the blood, and therefore they have the greatest impact on insulin. So you can see that a well-formulated ketogenic diet will say to the body, well, I'm not going to introduce any sugar or any carbohydrate, and therefore I'll keep the blood sugar low, and therefore I'll keep the insulin low. And this is why I like discussing the ketogenic diet, because for the first time, we're actually talking about the hormonal implications of the calories we eat and not the calorie balance. What does insulin tell our body when it receives glucose in the blood? It tells the body to put that excess glucose in storage. It tells the body to take the excess amino acids and push them into the cells for repair and regeneration and muscle growth, and so on and so forth. So insulin is the key, it's the driver, and it's really important to keep your insulin level low for optimal health. So that is a ketogenic diet, that it is a very low carbohydrate diet, and by virtue of that, it stimulates insulin the least. So what are ketones? So let's talk about this. Ketones are our alternative energy source to the body. The energy source that you and I are very familiar with is glucose. Why? Because of our dietary guidelines. We are told and encouraged to eat an enormous amount of carbohydrates in our diet. We have talked about the fact that the WHO wants us to be eating 50 to 75% of carbohydrates in our diet, and therefore our bodies will happily break that down into glucose, and our cells will utilize that glucose, all our cells, including our brain. But what happens in the absence of that glucose? What happened to our ancestors when they were feasting and fasting? What energy source did they use so that they didn't keel over in the absence of food? Think about that. So in our bodies, and in most of our bodies now, almost 2/3 of the world is obese and overweight. In most of our bodies, we have excess storages of fat. And what is that there for? Why do we have an adaptation to fat storage? We have that adaptation so that in the absence of food, in the absence of carbohydrates in particular, we can access that energy that is already in storage. So the way that works is, assume you're eating a normal diet. So you eat a normal diet and your blood sugar level rises, and it takes your body about 3 to 4 hours to completely clear that glucose load from that meal. And then what happens? If you don't eat, then your body starts to utilize the stored glucose, and the stored glucose is a product called glycogen. All glycogen is thousands of glucose molecules linked together. And therefore the body calls on that and says, good, I don't have enough glucose in the system. Let us utilize all the stored glycogen. And so for another several hours, you use that glycogen. But the glycogen stores are finite. And depending on what you're doing, you can actually go through them in a day or two. And then what happens next? Did our ancestors fall over? Did they keel over? No, they tapped into fat. And this is a process called beta oxidation, where your fat cells are broken down by a process called beta oxidation into ketones. Ketones are simply a byproduct of fat burn. So when you burn your fat, or when you oxidize your fat, you get these ketones. And these ketones are the alternative source of fuel that our bodies use in the absence of glucose. That's all it is. There is nothing new or sexy about ketones. They've always been there. They've always been utilized, particularly by our ancestors who went through fasting and feasting periods. They are the way the body maintains health and maintains its energy levels in the absence of glucose. So that's what ketones are. So ketones can be used by pretty much all the cells in your body, including your brain. And it depends how quickly you get into nutritional ketosis depends on how much sugar your body is currently holding at one particular time. So those are ketones, and I've just described the ketogenic diet. If you're just joining me, welcome. I am Dr. Nyambura. I am delighted to be speaking about the ketogenic diet today. We've just gone through what the ketogenic diet is and what ketones are, and that's where we've come to. I've also talked about insulin and its importance in context of the ketogenic diet. So knowing that carbohydrates are the leading cause of high blood sugar in the blood, when those are withdrawn and you lower your blood sugar, then what happens is that you lower your blood insulin. Now remember that insulin is a predominant storage hormone. It tells your body to store energy. So in the absence of insulin, there are other hormones that can now work in the absence of insulin to do the opposite. And the hormone that I'm talking about in particular is a hormone called glucagon. And this is a hormone that's also released by the pancreas, and it works in the absence of insulin. It's what we call a counter-regulatory hormone. So when insulin levels are very low, as it would be on a ketogenic diet, your glucagon levels start to rise. And what does glucagon do? It encourages mobilization of energy from your fat cells. So it tells your fat cells, okay, great, we have no glucose on board, our insulin levels are very low, why don't you now convert any extra energy in the fat cells into ketone bodies so that the body and the brain can use that for energy. And that's exactly what happens. But in the presence of insulin, none of that happens. Insulin is a very potent inhibitor of ketogenesis. And this is where people go wrong on ketogenic diets. You cannot cheat in a ketogenic diet. You cannot think you can have a little bit of carbohydrate and still efficiently be burning fat or producing carbohydrate because of the power of insulin. If insulin is available, and the only reason that would be so is because of you consuming carbohydrates, then almost always glucose will be used as a preferred energy source by your body. So if you want to counter that, you cannot cheat. You cannot be either willingly or unwillingly introducing small amounts of carbohydrate in your diet. A ketogenic diet is a ketogenic diet. We'll be talking about the differences between low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets in a moment. But on a strict, extremely low carb carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet, any amount of glucose would stimulate insulin, and insulin, like I've said, is a very, very potent inhibitor of ketogenesis. So let's talk about the ketogenic diet in context, because I think what most of you want to know is if it's safe, and if it's just a fad, and if it's going to knock your kidneys over. Now, some of you who know me know that I do spend, the first few minutes of my talks explaining the why. I truly believe that if I empower you with the knowledge, then you can understand why you're doing what you're doing. Being told to go on a low carb or a ketogenic diet on its own is useless. You need to be understanding why. Why will this work for me? Why won't this work for me? Exactly why. And now with the explanation that I've just given, I'm hoping that you can now explain to your friends and family exactly how a ketogenic diet works. So let's go through some of the myths, because I have about 5 or 6, actually 7 myths of the ketogenic diet. And I promise you, I am not going to talk for more than an hour. I promise you. And if I do, Faith, you have the authority to shut me down if you want. Gosh, quite a few other people have joined. Hi, Lizzie. Hi, Ruth. John, Sylvia, 10, Judy. Hi, Han. Gosh, lots of you. Thanks, guys. We're talking about the ketogenic diet, and now we're going to get to the part that is of interest to you. Is the ketogenic diet safe? I don't know what most of you think, but for me, and as a practicing physician, and someone who cannot accept bias, I have to just look at the evidence. This is my answer. Ketogenic diets are safe. They are very, very safe. Should everyone be on a ketogenic diet? No. Are they safe? Yes. And here is why. So our bodies, like I said earlier, are designed to utilize our fat stores in the absence of food, because historically we've fasted and feasted. So in the presence of food, we are feasting, we store some of that excess energy as fat, and in the absence of food, we are fasting. And therefore, we then utilize that stored energy as fat. That is how we've always been. That is how human beings have evolved. And that is why we are so incredibly successful. Now, there is clearly an evolutionary advantage and adaptation to using ketones and to using fat as energy based on what I've just said. So whenever there was very, very low carbohydrate in terms of drought, yet there was lots of animals to eat, our ancestors would eat plenty of animals. So that is high protein and high fat, which is essentially more or less a ketogenic diet. And the other thing to remember is that our brain uses, an adult brain uses about 20% of our total energy use, 20%. As a matter of comparison, a baby's brain, when a baby is, I think, up to 6, 7, 8 months old, uses 60% of the total body energy. So your brain is an enormously metabolically expensive machine. It needs a lot of energy. And our brain is built for survival, and therefore to survive, our bodies have perfectly adapted a system where they can utilize glucose and they can utilize ketones. And this just depends on how much food is available and how little food is available. Unfortunately, we no longer live in those times. We have 24-hour access to foods. We are constantly introducing glucose into our system. So our body has no need or desire to utilize fat for energy in the presence of glucose. So you can see how our dietary guidelines have got it all wrong. It is perfectly safe to be in ketosis. Instead of asking, is ketosis safe? The question you should be asking is glucose intake an absolute requirement? Is glucose absolutely necessary for survival? Is eating glucose necessary for survival? I don't know what you think, but my answer is no. You do not need to consume glucose to survive. Your body can make all the glucose you require through a process called gluconeogenesis. So say, for instance, you didn't eat any glucose at all, no carbohydrates whatsoever, and I tested your blood sugar, that would be within normal range. Why? Because your body is able to use fat, is able to use amino acids to generate glucose molecules from scratch. That's what gluconeogenesis is. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, and genesis meaning to create. So your body literally creates glucose from scratch. And this is going to become important in a minute. Why else is a ketogenic diet safe? A ketogenic diet is a low carbohydrate diet. It's a diet that does not allow sugar, and it does not allow an excesses of starches and grains. And actually, there is nothing hugely wrong with that, because we are over consuming sugar, starches, and grains anyway. I don't think everybody needs to be on a strict ketogenic diet, but we certainly all need to be watching our carbohydrate intake, because some of the evidence I'm going to present to you in a little while shows us that actually we're overdoing the carbohydrates. So no, glucose is not absolutely necessary for survival. And yes, ketones have been used by the human body for millennia, and they are entirely safe. They are safe, natural substrate for energy. Okay, so the second question is, what is the difference between ketosis and ketoacidosis? So let me explain this. So when we are talking about a ketogenic diet, you are trying to put your body into what we call nutritional ketosis. Nutritional ketosis, which means that you are using your diet to put you into ketosis, i.e., put you in a fat burning mode. That is nutritional ketosis. Starvation ketosis is another type of ketosis, and this is people who are truly starving. And by truly starving, what I mean and what doctors mean is you've burned through your glucose stores, you've burned through your glycogen stores, you've burned through your fat stores, and now you are burning through your protein, your functional tissue. That is what starvation is. So when I hear this nonsense about, oh, if I fast for a day, I'm going to starve, no, you won't. Starvation is a process by which you have burned through all the available energy substrates, and now you are literally burning protein to survive. That is a whole different thing. But for the sake of clarity, that is what starvation ketosis is. And starvation ketosis and nutritional ketosis only put your ketone levels up slightly. And that's the difference. Because in diabetic ketoacidosis, this is a condition that happens in type 1 diabetics who do not have a functioning pancreas. So they do not produce insulin. And they can die in the absence of insulin. And like I said at the very beginning of the video, insulin is a potent inhibitor of ketogenesis. And therefore the reverse is true. The absence of insulin is a very potent contributor and driver of ketosis or ketogenesis. And therefore these diabetic people have literally no insulin, and therefore burn through their fat cells and literally melt away. I mean, they present to hospital very, very sick, and all of them, 100% of them, are very, very thin. Because like I said in my very first video, you need insulin to put on weight. In the absence of insulin, you cannot put on weight because insulin is a major fat storage hormone. Okay, please go ahead and share the video. Ruth, you are welcome. Share as widely as you can. I really don't mind, and I'm very good at trying to answer some of the questions and comments that you may have. So that is a diabetic ketoacidosis. It is a disease state where these patients do not have any insulin and therefore melt away their fat and melt away their muscle. They then produce huge amounts of ketones, which then form into an acid, hence ketoacidosis. And those of you who know, understand science, our bodies have to maintain a very stable pH level. And when you introduce too much acid into the blood, you drop your pH and you get very, very sick. And very many type 1 diabetics used to die in the absence of insulin. Okay? So that is, I just wanted to clarify the differences between nutritional ketosis and ketoacidosis. Nutritional ketosis is safe because you have a functioning pancreas, and your body will always produce a little bit of insulin just to keep you going. It will always do that. It's not a complete absence of insulin. A complete absence of insulin is a disease state, and that is type 1 diabetics who develop what we call DKA, diabetes ketoacidosis. Number 2, do our brains need glucose? I don't know what you think about this, but I've told you already that there isn't any evidence whatsoever that your brain needs you to consume glucose. Now, I want you to hear me out. There is a very big difference between your brain needing glucose and your brain needing you to consume glucose. Our brains, yes, they do need a little bit of glucose to keep going. They do. But they do not need you to consume that glucose because of the process of gluconeogenesis that I just described. If there is a lack of glucose in your body can produce glucose, like I said, from fat and muscle, no problem at all. And if your brain is needing more glucose, remember that your brain consists of fat and cholesterol. And therefore, your brain, within the brain, can make all the glucose that it needs from scratch. And this is a point of contention. Remember that, yes, glucose is necessary, but it is not necessary for you to consume it. How do I know this? We have essential fatty acids, like your omegas. We have essential amino acids. Essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. These are fats and protein that your body cannot make on its own. So your body is dependent on you consuming these foods. That's why they are essential. There is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. I'll say it again. There isn't anything like an essential carbohydrate. You have essential fats and you have essential proteins, but you do not have essential carbohydrates. Why? Because of what I just said. Your body needs glucose, but it can make that glucose from scratch using a non-carbohydrate source, if it had to. But like I said, most of us consume far too many carbohydrates and there's plenty of glucose to go around, and therefore your brain will say, okay, I'll use that glucose. But in the absence of that, your brain is actually very happy, and there is a lot of evidence that it prefers ketones. Ketones seem to be a more superior fuel for the brain compared to glucose. And studies have shown that the brain can actually displace glucose in the presence of ketones. So the brain needs glucose. More evidence to support this is how we put epileptic children on ketogenic diets. Why do we do that? Because it lowers their seizure frequency. They develop less seizures on a ketogenic diet. This means that the process of ketosis and ketones are a preferred brain fuel for these individuals, because when you burn fat, this affects your neurotransmitters and all your other proteins and chemicals that cause brain electrical stability. And this is why patients with epilepsy have such good outcomes on ketogenic diets. Ketogenic diets have also been studied on brain cancer and other neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, a type of muscular disease called ALS. It's been looked at for ischemic strokes and so many things. So, so the brain actually, believe it or not, is happy on a ketogenic diet. It's happy when there's ketones floating around. And, you might wonder why, I looked into this a few days ago, and I discovered that humans are very, very unique. In other animals, for instance, cats, the cat family, because cats are predominantly carnivores, you would assume that they have very high, they have high ketones that they burn through their fat as well. But what we actually know is that other animals and other primates actually sacrifice their lean tissue instead of the fat. So, their bodies would rather burn through their lean functional tissue, their muscles, rather than the fat. Humans are unique. Why is it that a human being will put itself into a state of ketosis by burning fat in the presence of enough muscle to create enough glucose to support the brain? Ever thought about that? Like, why? If we have enough muscle to produce enough glucose and other animals are doing that, why do our bodies still prefer using ketones? And this is what we think, what us scientists think is that there's a lot of evidence that actually they're beneficial and the preferred fuel for the brain. Now, let's move on down our myths. And the other myth is that, these are all questions you've asked me, by the way. The other myth is a ketogenic diet meat and eggs diet? Who is it who asked me that? No, a ketogenic is not a high protein diet. A ketogenic diet is a low carbohydrate, high natural fat, moderate protein diet. And remember, you can get your protein from vegetarian sources, and so it's perfectly possible to have a very, very well formulated vegetarian ketogenic diet. So no, when you go on a ketogenic diet, you are not going to be eating meat and eggs and bacon and cheese and drinking olive oil. I mean, you can if you want. That will certainly put you into deep ketosis, but that's not what it's about. It's in fact, yes, you can eat quite a bit of protein on ketogenic diets, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's not so much the protein. You need to fill the diet with fat. Make sure you're having enough protein, and really drop your carbohydrates. So it's not a high meat diet, as some people say. And of course, this has implications on the environment, because a lot of people would say, well, you guys are going to, you're destroying the environment, you're destroying the planet. Well, actually, it's not the ketogenic diet that's destroying the environment. It's our farming practices. It's the way we are raising animals in abhorrent, huge, unnatural factories. If an animal is allowed to pasture, they actually participate in carbon sequestration. They actually do, if they're allowed to pasture normally. But no, we raise these animals for yield, and we raise them for profit. And therefore, we raise them in abhorrent, horrific conditions because of our desire to consume meat. That is not what a ketogenic diet is about. It's not about consuming unlimited amounts of meat. It is simply about producing just what you need, okay? Just what the human being needs. And most of us generally overconsume meat, and we shouldn't be. But that does not mean it doesn't have a place in your diet. Okay, just one moment. Then the other argument is, I hope you're still with me, people. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Faith. Wonderful. So the other myth was saturated fat. And in my last video, I talked about this in detail. There's been 3 or 4 meta-analyses. A meta-analysis is an analysis of other big clinical trials. And there have been 3 or 4 of these looking at saturated fat and its impact on health, particularly cardiovascular health. And the long and short of it is, yes, a ketogenic diet will encourage meat eating to some extent, and meat is high in saturated fat. I'll have you know that coconut oil is the highest has the highest amount of saturated fat as a food on earth. But there you go, we tend to put that all on meat. But yeah, saturated fats are entirely safe. In fact, they are protective. They need to be coming back into our diets. They do not clog the arteries. They are healthful. They help you absorb your fat-soluble vitamins. I mean, I could go on and on and on about natural saturated fats. Natural being the key. We are not talking about fats that are made in factories. Remember this, nature does not make dangerous fats. Factories do, not nature. So the saturated fats in the ketogenic diet are acceptable. And then the other thing is it bad for the kidneys? There is evidence that no, it is not bad for your kidneys at all, a ketogenic diet. The important thing is that you're healthy. If you're healthy, and this is why they always say, do not start a new diet without liaising with your doctor. Because for kidney disease, for instance, you could be walking around with kidney disease and have no idea. So it's important to be looked at, to have your blood tests measured before you embark on these kind of diets. But unless you have fairly advanced kidney disease, only in that situation is there evidence of a strain on the kidneys. Apart from that, if you're healthy, a ketogenic diet will not harm your kidneys. And then they say it's an extreme diet. Is it really an extreme diet to be eating pasture-fed meat, green vegetables, a less amount of sugars, less amount of grains, less amount of starches that are making us sicker and fatter? I mean, a ketogenic diet, a low carbohydrate diets are whole food diets. Whole food meaning you look at what's on your plate and you can recognize its origin. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are the foods that have existed in nature for hundreds and thousands and millions of years. I don't see the extremeness of it at all. I think not everybody needs to go on a purely ketogenic diet, but I think we all need to be on low carbohydrate diets. And this brings us to how low is low. Now, most people consume 100, 200, 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, and most of those carbohydrates are grains, sugars, and starches. So if you go from 300 grams to 100 grams a day of carbohydrates, that has huge, enormous metabolic advantages, enormous, but it's still not a ketogenic diet. If you go from 100 grams a day to 40 grams a day of carbohydrates, that has a huge metabolic advantage also. So it's only a matter of this. How sick are you? How fat are you? How metabolically well are you? That is what's going to determine how low you need to go on your carbohydrates, okay? Now, for somebody like me, I weigh 53 kilograms. I do not need or want to lose any weight. So do I have a low carbohydrate diet? Well, I don't. I have a moderate carbohydrate diet. That means I don't eat sugars and I eat the healthiest starches, the sweet potatoes, the arrowroots, the yams, the cassava. Those are the starches that I consume in my low carbohydrate diet. I will not have carbohydrates all day, but I certainly will have a little bit with each meal. For my clients, and the clients I look after are the metabolically very unwell, if they're diabetic, yes, they go on a significantly low carbohydrate diet, but it does not need to put them into ketosis. That is not necessary. How do you know when you're in ketosis? Some people will say they can check it in the urine using a urine stick, or you can check it in your blood, or you notice differences in your breath. That's how you know you're in ketosis. But is that necessary to achieve metabolic health? No, I don't think it is. I think most of us just need to just come right down, but not that low. So like I said earlier, I think at the beginning, a true ketogenic diet will be maybe 10 grams of carbohydrates. But I've seen people get very, very healthy, drop their insulin requirement, reverse their diabetes, reverse their high blood pressure, drop their waist and lose a ton of weight simply by just reducing the amount of carbohydrates they're consuming by half. Drop it by 50%, see what effect that has on you, and then you can decide if you need to be cutting it lower. No one else will decide that for you. It depends on how fat you are and how sick you are. Okay, so and that's how I do it on my program. My program is an individualized weight loss program, and we cut down the carbohydrates based on need, not based on a prescription, because we are all very metabolically unique. So what are the benefits of a ketogenic diet? I mean, what aren't the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet? A low carbohydrate diet, because of the very fact that it's mobilizing your fat stores, you lose weight. And that's what we all want. We want to lose weight. So it does that very, very well. And it can put diabetes in remission as well. And the obesity and diabetes support for low weight program is huge. I mean, there's so much evidence to support a low carbohydrate program for obesity and weight loss that if it were a drug, it would have been approved by the FDA by now. It really works. It's so powerful and it's healthy, particularly if monitored by a physician. If you can put diabetes in remission, you can see why you suddenly reduce your cardiovascular risk, so less heart attacks, less strokes. People describe improved mental function. People who don't need to lose weight go into ketosis for mental performance because they feel sharp, they feel on point, they feel such mental clarity, the fogginess disappears. They feel alert all the time. And because they're not consuming carbohydrates, which cause all these highs and lows, the fat energy is a very stable source of energy. And therefore, you don't get cravings. You know, it suppresses your appetite. You don't feel shaky after a meal. You just feel good. You feel great. It also has all the benefits of fasting without the caloric restriction. So those of you who don't like to fast, try a low carbohydrate diet, because actually it gives you the vast majority of the benefits if you don't want to fast. And there's a lot of evidence that it also maintains your metabolic rate. And studies have been done on people on isocaloric diets. So what that means is that you put people on the same amount of calories for fat and for protein and for carbohydrates, and the people on the lowest amount of carbohydrate have the highest basal metabolic rates. And part of the way I can explain this is that, you know, you have two types of fat, your brown fat and your white fat, and being on a low carbohydrate diet actually stimulates your brown fat to thrive and to be activated. And brown fat is very, very thermogenically active. So you actually lose a lot of energy in heat. So that's another, you know, advantage of a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. So those are, I mean, there's so many advantages of a low carbohydrate diet. I think everybody should be on a low carbohydrate diet, but I do not believe that a ketogenic diet, i.e. a strictly low carbohydrate diet, is necessary for everyone. Yes, for some, but not for everyone. The vast majority of us need to just drop our carbohydrates by half. Okay, so what do I have left to talk about? The side effects, are there any? Yes, there are. But the biggest side effect is attempting this diet if you are diabetic, particularly if you are diabetic on medication. Because when I put patients on low carbohydrate diets, we start to drop the insulin requirement immediately. And therefore, if you're still injecting insulin, and you're not doing it with a doctor, and therefore you're not adjusting your insulin based on your lower carbohydrate, then you can actually drop your blood sugar to dangerous levels, which will put you into seizures or even death. So do not attempt a ketogenic diet or a low carbohydrate diet if you're on insulin or on other glucose lowering tablets without support and supervision of your doctor. It is downright dangerous. I can't say I know anyone who has dropped dead from it, because actually most diabetic patients are on point. They know how to adjust their insulin levels, but why take the risk? There are doctors like me and others who can support you through that process, so use us. Are there any other disadvantages of a ketogenic diet? Well, I guess the biggest is, will I miss my carbohydrates? But what I tell people is, once you become fat adapted, once your body is quite happy to mobilize fat stores for energy, then what you find is that you control your appetite and you don't crave the things you've been craving the most. You know, I read an article that actually most of our cravings could be linked to nutritional deficiencies. And if half of your plate is grain, and grain has very little, if any, nutrition, then actually that means that the rest of your plate is very low in nutrition. And so if you then reduce the amount of carbohydrates on your plate, that means that you're automatically eating more green vegetables and more healthy protein. And so you're getting most of your nutrients. So your cravings are lower. The only extreme low carb thing I've seen with ketogenesis is people who go on a zero carbohydrate diet. And I have an issue with that, because remember, fiber is a carbohydrate, and fiber is very important, not for you, but for your gut bacteria. We have about 100 trillion gut bacteria in our lower intestines, and they need and desire fiber. That's how they thrive, and that's how they keep you healthy and protect you from diseases, and a wide range of diseases. So when I start seeing ketogenic diets that are formulated without greens, without fiber, then I have an issue with that. Because at the end of the day, as a scientist and as a doctor, we're not simply looking at weight loss. We're looking at overall outcomes. So if you're looking at overall outcomes, you cannot then increase the risk of colorectal cancer by not minding your gut bacteria, while at the same time losing weight. So losing weight does not and should never, ever take priority of your overall health. So when you're embarking on a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet, think about the long-term outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? Yes, we want to lose weight, but importantly, you want to achieve optimal metabolic health. And a ketogenic diet does that for you. But we will not go so low in our healthy carbohydrates that you put the rest of your health at risk. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really, really important that healthful carbohydrates, i.e. fiber, i.e. green vegetables and multicolored vegetables, those are incredibly healthful, and those should be in every single ketogenic diet. So I'm talking about anything that grows above the ground. So, you know, your tomatoes, your sweet peppers, your greens, your broccoli, all your cruciferous vegetables, your runner beans, kale, spinach, skuma wiki. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's so much you can eat. And then remember the healthy fruits as well, the coconut, the avocado. So actually, a low carbohydrate diet, in my opinion, is one of the most nutritionally dense diets out there. And I fully, fully support it. And finally, is ketosis necessary to lose weight? No, it is not. You can lose weight by cutting down on your carbohydrate intake, and then you and your physician can continue cutting it down up to the point where you achieve your best health. Someone asked me, you know, and told me, sorry, I'm just answering a question. Diabetic people with high blood sugar can do keto? Absolutely. Diabetic people should be on low carbohydrate diets, not necessarily targeting ketosis, but significantly low carbohydrate diets. And they should do that, especially if they're on insulin and other diabetic drugs. They should do that with a physician, not on their own. Yes, it is entirely safe. If you look at the biggest diabetic support group in the UK, diabetes.co.uk, they are fully supporting the low carb program, and hundreds of thousands of people have joined that support group. So diabetic patients are doing this as we speak. I'm just going through some of the questions. I have heard since disadvantages of keto diet. So your body goes through the Krebs cycle. I'm not sure what you mean by that. The Krebs cycle is a physiological cycle where it's beta oxidation. That's how you produce your ketones. It's natural. It happens all the time. The only main disadvantage with a ketogenic diet, I said, is if you do it, if you're diabetic and on medication. I think those are most of the questions. So yes, ketosis is good, but it's not necessary to achieve optimal weight loss. If you want to, in other words, I don't want you to be cutting down on your green vegetables to achieve ketosis, if that's what it takes. Remember that our bodies are very different. So you can have you and your sister does well on 100 grams of carbohydrates, and you do well on 50 grams of carbohydrates. So don't go for these commercial programs. Go for an individualized program, something that will work for you, because your body is unique to you. And you will get into ketosis when your body is ready. That said, there are lots of things you can do to encourage your body to go into ketosis if that is what you want. And remember, even if I'm not promoting the ketogenic diet for all, I am here to give you information, and therefore I have to do that. And the things you can do to speed up your ketosis are to try intermittent fasting, which is an incredibly powerful tool that you can use to drop your insulin levels further. And then you can exercise, because remember, your fat cells and your muscles are your greatest glucose reservoirs. So if you want to get rid of that stored glucose and glycogen quickly to get you into ketosis faster, then exercise and fast. When you exercise, you will utilize your muscle glycogen and glucose, and when you fast, you will do the same. When you fast for longish periods of time, you know, up to 24 hours, you can certainly do that unsupervised. Any more than that, then you need supervision. So I think I have talked for 53 minutes, and I think I promised I wouldn't talk for more than an hour. Can I just wrap up? We've been talking about the ketogenic diet. It is an incredibly safe diet, particularly in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, i.e. a physician like myself who has embraced something that goes against current guidelines. You know, I will never recommend the current nutritional guidelines to any of my clients because there is a lot of evidence that they cause harm. There has been an enormous study that's just been published. It's called the PURE study, and it's looked at countries throughout the 5 continents, poor countries, middle income countries, and rich countries. And the overwhelming evidence is that high carbohydrate diets, i.e. more than 55%, are in fact associated with an increased risk of death. So I am completely convinced that we are overdoing carbohydrates. And in that I mean the grains, the starches, and the sugars. So I would encourage everybody, regardless of your metabolic state, to cut down on sugars, especially you guys know how I don't do sugar. Cut down on the sugars, cut down on your refined carbohydrates, your breads, your pastas, your bagels, wraps. You know where I'm going with this. And if you're not terribly overweight, there is no reason why you cannot include your root starches. Those are the ones that are healthy and they're full of fiber. Ketogenic diets are safe. They are healthful, and low carbohydrates in diets in general have been proven time and time again in good quality studies that they can actually put diseases like diabetes and obesity in remission. So I fully support them. I think the only caveat, and I must say this to protect myself and others, is do not, if you're diabetic, start any low carbohydrate diet, particularly if you're on insulin, without a doctor's supervision. So Faith is saying, I use intermittent fasting, I recommend it, and your A1C dropped by 0.5 point. Exactly. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but I put my own father, my own dad was diagnosed with diabetes when I was in Nairobi 3 weeks ago. About 4 weeks ago, and I put him on a low carbohydrate diet, and he no longer is diabetic. He went from a pre-diabetic state to a normal glucose state, a normal glycemic state, simply by reducing the amount of carbohydrates in his diet. And he's still having arrowroots, doma, he's still having gouache, which is sweet potatoes, he's still having the things that he likes, but he's not having all these other highly processed foods. Thank you, guys. I think I'm done. I hope you found that session helpful. I hope I've managed to help you understand ketosis, ketogenesis, ketogenic diets. There is nothing new from our body's perspective about using fat for energy. That's all ketosis is. It's using fat for energy. There is nothing new about it. We are perfectly, exquisitely adapted to cycle between burning fat and burning glucose. And for the vast majority of us who are overweight, we should be trending towards burning more fat. Your body will thank you for it, and it will do no harm for most people. Okay, let me leave it there. I thank you. I thank you so much for listening. do not feel shy about writing any comments or anything, any suggestions in ways I could improve my future videos. I really do read every single comment, and I take all your opinions on board. Remember that this is a live video for everybody. See your physician if you need individual advice. That is the only advice that I cannot give. I can only give generic advice. Once again, my name is Dr. Nyambura Mboro. I am the founder of Insulin, a medical weight loss clinic here in the United Kingdom. I am delighted to help anyone who needs any help with weight loss, and particularly if you're very overweight or obese, I'd be delighted to help you. Please get in touch with me through my insulin page on Facebook. Otherwise, just send me a message and I'll respond. So that's it. Take care, everybody. I am going to be doing another live video, and I won't leave it too long this time. And the next video is about diabetes and why we should stop chasing glucose when it comes to diabetes. So tune in next time for my next video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.